that?
It wasn't a New Japan storyline, and I get, I've gone into this conversation a lot, and I never really seem to do a very good job articulating it, but there was a period of time before the NWO, 94, 95 in particular, when 93, 94, but especially in early part of 1995, when I was spending a lot of time in Japan. And this is where all the internet wrestling community needs to get out a pencil and a paper and take some very, very, detailed notes here. But I was going over to Japan on a regular basis. And what I studied while I was there, and when I say studied, I'm just a very observant person by nature. And I was, WCW was flat on its back at that time. We couldn't get 1,200 people to buy a ticket to a giant pay-per-view if our lives depended on it. We would show up and do TV tapings, and maybe 125 people would show up, and half of them would be drunk with a bottle of cheap wine in a brown paper bag. They'd fall asleep halfway through the show. I mean, we were dead as dead could be as a brand and a property. And I was trying really hard to study the way other successful people presented wrestling to try to figure out a solution to the WCW challenge at that time. And because I was spending a lot of time in Japan, I was studying the psychology of the storytelling that was presented in Japan. Because if at that time, I haven't been over there now in many years, but at that time, wrestling was treated like a sport. It was treated just like soccer. It was treated like, Japanese baseball, which is massive over there. It had a lot of credibility. The big Tokyo Dome shows would, you'd go on a, Saturday night, and on Sunday morning you get up and it would be on the front headlines of the sports page. And I spent so much time learning about the psychology in Japanese storytelling and how they did such a phenomenal job of convincing the audience that what they were seeing was real. And it allowed the audience to forget that it was, hey, it's professional wrestling. It wasn't like that in Japan back then. It was very believable and very credible. So as I studied the storytelling and the presentation technique that was so successful in Japan, because back then they were putting 60, 75,000 people in the Tokyo Dome, at an average ticket price of $120 a ticket. So it was like, okay, I got to figure this out. And one of the common kind of denominators that I kept discovering in the analysis of the psychology and the storytelling process there was the takeover idea. And it's war. It's one country taking over another country. It's one gang wanting to take over another gang's neighborhood. It was back in my days when I was in martial arts, the first thing you did if you wanted to open a karate school was go to your competitor's karate school and kick the instructor's butt. That's just the way, it's human nature, like I talked about as we opened up. So I was studying the different things that worked in Japan, and that's when the light bulbs, and it wasn't like one big giant light bulb. It was like a little flicker of a light over here and a little flicker of a light over there and one over there that happened over the course of 4, 5, 6, or 7 months, way before I even really conceived of the NWO. The formation of that storytelling kind of approach, the psychology, had been really brewing inside of my skull for really about a year. And then what it was, John, more than anything, it was like the perfect storm of this storytelling psychology that I've been kind of trying to formulate after being in Japan that just crossed paths uniquely with the availability of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And the fact that both Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were in WCW before they went to the WWE to become big stars. They left WCW feeling like they were mistreated and underappreciated, which is not unusual for wrestling talent. But they left with, I don't want to say a chip on their shoulder, but kind of. so that when those little light bulbs that have been kind of flickering on and off inside of my skull for a year or so, kind of still kept flickering. And then all of a sudden, now I've got two guys that used to be in WCW who went over to WWE, became big stars, and now they were coming back to prove WCW wrong, to take revenge. They were coming over to take over the neighborhood. That's the story. And it's a basic fundamental story. It's not some genius, Shakespearean tale. It's a pretty basic story. But it was a basic story that was believable. And that's, in my opinion, why it worked.